So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the character sheet. I'm going to walk you through some of the key terminology. We're going to talk about stats and derived stats and give you an idea of just exactly how Colonial Born works at a mechanical level. So to begin with, we have our usual and a kind of expected fields that you would find in a character sheet. There's a name area. We have a place to put our experience, the amount of essence that we have, as well as the next life stage, which would be the goal at which we would cross into the point of being like from adolescent to adult to the next life stage again. So then, of course, we have our area for our intention, which is what tells us when an action provides us with an experience feedback. There's also 3 spaces here for 3 kinds of disciplines: a martial discipline, a technical discipline, and a thaumaturgic discipline. So under normal circumstances, most characters will only be able to have 1 martial, 1 technical, and 1 thaumaturgic discipline at a time. However, in the case of humans, they have a unique ability that means that they don't get the thaumaturgic discipline. So they have martial, technical, and they may take a second technical discipline in place of the thaumaturgic. We then have our stat breakdown, which is right here on the left. So mechanically in Colonial Born, every single stat in the game can be targeted and damaged via a certain kind of action. So what you'll notice is I have a split in each one of the base stats. That is for that's to demonstrate like what its standard value is, what the current value is. And then there's the value of after it's been damaged. So there's a way to track damage there, like with hit points. So as you can see, we actually have 8 separate stats in Colonial Born: vitality, physique, fortitude, coordination, ingenuity, perception, faculty, and spirit. So the way that I kind of rationalized how to do this was that I wanted to separate some of the key elements that other games kind of attach together. Like, people tend to connect vitality and physique together into some uniform strength or physical stat, and I wanted to decouple those a little bit. So I see vitality as a general sense of wellness. It's the condition of the heart, the operations of your body and whatnot, whether or not you're in just sort of a general state of good health, and that's by extension connected to the human concept of like aerobic exercise. Whereas physique is very anaerobic. Physique is about strength. It's about raw power. It's about tone. It's about definition. And so by definition, physique tends, at least in humans, to produce high damage, whereas vitality produces high health. So given that we have the option to manipulate damage in the game and damage levels independent of our class and independent of our level, I've decoupled these stats for that reason. So then we have fortitude, and fortitude is not so much it's not simply the ability to or our capacity to incur harm. It's also our ability to persevere. So fortitude is whether or not we have the discipline to be able to do something when it's hard. Fortitude is also our ability to cope when we're inebriated or poisoned or something like that. Fortitude is also our ability to keep pressing forward when under extreme levels of pain and duress. Then there's coordination. I felt coordination was a better fit than something like dexterity, agility, or speed, because I felt that dexterity is dexterity is close, but agility and speed are kind of like emergent attributes. They're things that are produced. So speed is generally something that's produced from coordination and physique, whereas like agility is coordination and ingenuity. I feel like dexterity in particular is while close to coordination, it doesn't necessarily give us a good picture of it. So for me, coordination is the ability to be able to get the body to do what you want it to. It's your ability to balance yourself. That is obviously a dexterous trait, but the ability to achieve hand-eye coordination, like the kind of thing that produces good drawing or, enables repeated tasks for like driving and whatnot. Like driving is not necessarily a dexterity skill, but it is definitely a coordination skill. So it's the ability of multiple body parts to work simultaneously, and then it's also the ability to be able to produce the kinds of movements consistently and repeatedly. Ingenuity is your ability to think on the fly and improvise. So a person with a good ingenuity score, for instance, would be able to quickly respond to in conversation, like in a sales conversation or sales context, they would be able to sell something quite easily because they would be able to react very, very quickly to incoming information. And so ingenuity is the ability to see the unconventional in the moment. That doesn't necessarily improve one's reaction time. That's tied to perception. So perception is your ability to see things, but it's also the speed with which you see things. So perception is very tied to questions like dodge and a lot of like basic defense attributes, because it's fundamentally about your ability to understand where something is, where it's coming from, and be able to react against it. But at the same time, perception is also the ability to see the unseen. So if you are in a room and there's a secret trapdoor or something like that, then perception is something that would aid you in that respect. Faculty. Faculty is the substitute for a general intelligence score. I never liked the idea of intelligence as a score, because to me, intelligence reflects a person's accumulated knowledge and their accumulated, to put it simply, it's how much they've learned. A character is, for instance, much more intelligent after they've gone. A person is much more intelligent if they've gone to large amounts of school. So if you go to, say, university or something like that, and you spend, 5-6 years at university, then your intelligence is going to be considerably higher than your intelligence would have been when you started. Why? Because you have a greater repository of knowledge to lean upon and to organize inside of your mind. And so therefore you're capable of assimilating and translating information at a greater rate. That to me does not spell an inherent attribute of a character. What that does is that it spells to me accumulation of things that you've gotten over time, as well as the character's faculty. So their faculty is a comprehension skill. Faculty is your ability to hear it, understand it, apply it. And so a person who has a high level of faculty will be able to make sense of information as it arrives. They'll also be able to apply different lenses and different mental models to solve different problems. So a great example of this would be in an engineering sense. So, how many years have electric cars proven to be impossible until someone comes along with a point of view that changes things, where they say, instead of thinking by analogy, I'm going to think about it in terms of first principles. just simply applying something like first principles, choosing to use that mental model rather than a different mental model in order to approach a problem, is a different way of assimilating, translating, or dealing with information. It doesn't necessarily mean that you produce the correct outcome. That still requires ingenuity. You still need to be creative and adaptable to be able to produce responses. But to be able to assimilate, that's faculty. And then finally, we have spirit. And spirit is our connection to an ability to manipulate the ephemeral. If there's something metaphysical out there that we can manipulate that produces magic or powers or whatever you want to call it, then this thing would be spirit. So, humans are not very good at manipulating spirit. I would say that, on average, all these scores, by the way, trend from 1 to 100. I would say humans, if they're lucky, the most advanced, most spiritual, most capable humans might cap out somewhere between a 10 to a 15. Whereas you have certain species who, by their very nature, are just dropping in their 20s. They're much more attuned with the ephemeral, or they're much more attuned with the ability to use the metaphysical to warp and change the thaumaturgic elements out there to bend the laws of physics to make them work for them. And this is where powers come from in the system. So below that, we have an action pool. In Colonial Born, action pools are my way of dealing with speed. So I don't treat speed as an initiative element. To me, initiative is mostly based on reaction time. It's your ability to move first. Doesn't necessarily imply that you move most. Speed is a function of distance over time. So speed is how much you can do in the same amount of time as another person. I translate this into an action pool. And so we then use action pools to approach adding more actions to a single round. When I do the battle breakdown in the next video, I'll explain more of what action pools are about and how they're used, because this is one of the most emergent qualities of Colonial Born in the way that we approach things differently. It creates a different kind of character. And it's very closely tied with the idea of opportunity actions, such as the parry, dodge, and clash attributes. Going past that, we have reach, move, and leap. So reach is our ability, quite specifically, to reach out and grab something. Our reach defines our melee range. So we treat range and reach differently when we're drawing lines inside combat scenarios, where reach defines a specific character's range with a melee thing. It's not always necessarily reach of 1. Some characters can have a reach 2 or 3, and with a long pole, for instance, you might have a reach up to 4 or 5. But the idea of separating range and reach was very early in the design conception of the game. Move and leap are pretty straightforward. Leap is how much you can actually traverse vertically. Move is how far you can move horizontally on the map. And then below that, we have senses: sight, smell, sound, tremor, heat, and energy. So there are 6 essential senses. Sight would be the visual, smell would be olfactory, sound would be echolocation, tremor would be tremor sense, heat would be thermoception, and energy is kind of almost a telelocation or telepathic awareness of people and locations. And so by sight, smell, sound, tremor, heat, and energy, we draw different lines, and different species have access to different senses. And so a character, for instance, that's hiding behind a bush is not going to be able to hide from a character with thermoception. And so different conditions, which apply different stealth conditions, block different senses. And so not all characters are going to be able to approach stealth in the same way when dealing with the same threats. There's a certain asymmetry that's built in there. Then we have parry, dodge, and clash. As I mentioned, these are opportunity actions. I'll cover them in the combat section. And then we have intensity. Intensity is the term that's used for calculating specific damage. So if you do 3d20 damage, then your intensity is 60, which is the maximum possible threshold for damage. This is important because when we're calculating what the energy cost is of any specific action, we rely on its intensity. If it's a costed action, we use the intensity, 60. If it's a costed damage, then we roll the 3d20, and whatever the result is, that's the damage and that's the energy cost. So health, that's pretty straightforward. You probably recognize that for most tabletop role-playing games. Then we have melee attack, range attack, power attack, as well as their defense equivalents. So melee, range, and power are essentially the three forms of attack and defense forms that exist. So melee is drawn with reach, range is drawn with range, power is typically drawn with the range of a specific power or ability. Our defense for melee attacks, range attacks, and power attacks are very different, as well as our ability to attack with those values. Now, you'll notice that there's a bunch of fields, and it's actually littered throughout here. There's fields at the top here. There's some in this area as well. There's some next to dodge, clash, intensity. So when I talked about having different derived stats in the makeup for the future of Colonial Born, when I was talking about the game design document, this is what I'm talking about. So up here under parry, for instance, if you were to select a parry value, if you were trying to create a parry value, what you would do is you would assign the derived stat value, which would be ingenuity and perception, let's say. So your ingenuity value, if it's 20, and the perception value, if it's 20, will produce a +2 and a +2. So we would take, if we wanted to assign ingenuity, we would just put ingenuity in there, perception in there, and then we would add up the values and place them in the main block as our stat value for parry. In the case of parry, dodge, and clash, we would actually use the whole value. So if you have a 30 Fortitude, you would use the 30. But when you're doing things like melee attack, you would use the proficiency, which would be a +3 if it was a 30. The general rule is it's round down to the nearest whole number of 10. So if it's 30, it's +3. If it's 39, it's +3. If it's 40, it's +4. We then look down here on armor. So the armor section, and actually it's connected to carapace. So your armor and your carapace are essentially the two layers of the way that you process damage, and you process damage down the stack. So beginning with armor, what you do is you find out what your damage reduction is. Once the damage that has been dealt to you, then you check your armor component and you check what its reduction, what your reduction is, reduce the amount by that amount, and then you simply keep doing this and working your way down the stack. You deal with armor before you deal with changes to your character, which is your carapace. So if I was to cast a spell, for instance, that gave me like steel skin or something along those lines, and I was wearing leather armor on top of it, I would process damage reduction in my armor before I would process damage reduction in the steel skin. So active effects go armor down the stack, as you can follow by the arrow, to your carapace, which then gets processed at the end. There are some fields here that may be a little bit lost, but they're power specific. So like the bank, for instance, Many times charges are assigned to a carapace. So if you have, like, for instance, an aura ability, you may have to discharge a charge in order to be able to use the carapace value. So there's a little spot there to be able to accumulate bank charges. Intensities, reducers, proficiencies, and cores. These are all aspects of running different kinds of powers. However, it's worth noting what core means. So every power in the game is assigned a core, as well as an intensity. Whenever you form the power or use the power for the first time or train with the power, the current intensity and the current core value are locked at the training value. So if I have, for instance, a core of vitality, and my vitality is 40, then the core value is 40, and then the current intensity that I have is what gets locked in as the current intensity. And when I train, it will get baked in. It won't change from that point forward. Even if my intensity improves, even if I improve my vitality, the train action will remain as it is. And the reason for this is to encourage characters to retrain in certain activities or certain actions. Because if you want to use a power or ability and there's a bunch of other facets or things you could attach to it, you don't really have a lot of incentive to go back and retrain that power because it costs so much essence. So instead, we've created this kind of limitation that ultimately forces a character, or should I say a player, to decide where and when they want to upgrade. So this all comes into the kind of timing of the progression. So if you're going through, like, for instance, a thaumaturgic discipline and you had like a specific power, let's say it's a pyrokinetic beam, and you've made a pyrokinetic beam and you've based it on Ingenuity, and it's an intensity of like 2d10 20. So you have Ingenuity value of like 15, and then intensity of 20, and you have that locked in, and your intensity is improving and your Ingenuity is improving, and then you get to a point where you're ready to upgrade it. Well, if you're so far along your thaumaturgic discipline and you're like, wait a minute, there's a little boost I could get here that could seriously improve the quality of my fire damage. Maybe it turns it into like an irradiating fire damage. Like it adds the fallout condition as well as the burn condition. Then maybe I want to get that, so that when I train the new power or ability or retrain that power or ability, I don't just get the boost to Ingenuity. I don't just get the boost to intensity. I also get the boost of that extra little card that I can add into the mix. And then that makes the timing of progression and the timing of retraining as something that you're actively trying to find the right synergies. So this is kind of like the base mechanics and stuff, all the base stats. You can kind of see how things work. I almost forgot health. So as is the case with parry, dodge, and clash, intensity, melee attack, melee defense, we assign core values, or we assign a base stat to create a derivative stat. So as you can see here, there's a space to choose your base stat proficiency. In this case, maybe you would choose vitality for health. So if your vitality was 20, then you would put vitality here and then 2 in the following column. Now there's a slash here and then another area that says life stage die. So your life stage determines what your energy and health die is. So if you are an adolescent, you may have D12. And then as you're an adult, you're a D20. And then when you reach like mid to late adulthood, you might drop back down to a 12. And then in seniority, you drop down to a 10, right? Well, the 10, 12, whatever it is, if you're, let's say, an adolescent, you would put this number in the life stage die. So your vitality of 2 And the life stage die of 12 means that you have 2d12 of health. So your max HP then would be 24. If a character was attacking you with dismemberment, they would attack your proficiency value. So they would go in and they would cut off a health die. You would then drop from 2d12 to 1d12, which drastically changes your max HP and is far more devastating than if you just did current hit point damage. So this is another way where attacking various stats have more kind of thematically true representations within the system. So in the next video, I'm just going to cover what combat is like, how to process a specific action, and walk you through the various stages in the order of battle.